For you, our incredibly curious listener, we've definitely been seeing your questions pop up about some of the real head scratchers in ancient texts.
Yeah, those passages that make you stop and think, wait, what's the story behind this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you really sent us digging this time, sharing that really interesting YouTube discussion on the Book of Enoch and how it ties into Genesis 6. So, yeah, get ready for maybe a few light bulbs to go off as we take a deep dive into these ancient ideas about the sons of God, giants, and even the nature of spiritual beings.
It's a cosmology that might be quite surprising, actually. And what's really compelling about the sources you shared is how they push us to look at those, familiar early bits of Genesis through a lens that's maybe less familiar, but was incredibly influential. I'm talking about the Book of Enoch.
Right.
So our goal today is really to unpack these, let's say, ancient perspectives on what Genesis just touches on pretty briefly, actually, and to explore how Enoch doesn't just expand on it, but also connects to, broader ancient cultures and even quite remarkably, the New Testament.
Okay, so let's start right there where it often gets confusing. Genesis 6. You read this little bit. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives. And it begs so many questions.
It really does. Like, who exactly are these sons of God? What happened?
Yeah.
And this is precisely where the Book of Enoch comes into play, especially the part known as the Book of the Watchers.
Yeah.
That's a key section in what we call First Enoch.
Okay, the Watchers.
And the perspective that video you sent highlighted is, it's really intriguing. The idea that the author of Genesis probably just assumed their audience already knew the more detailed story found in Enoch.
So it wasn't like new information.
Probably not. It was likely, part of the shared understanding in that ancient culture. Think of it like a quick reference to a story everyone kind of knew already.
That's a fascinating way to think about it, like shorthand for a much bigger story that was already out there.
Exactly.
Now, the video also mentioned this ancient idea of a golden age, like a first time when gods and humans were, I guess, living together more closely. How does that fit in?
Well, what's fascinating is how this golden age idea pops up in different ways across so many ancient cultures. You have the Greek myths, obviously, and as the video noted, the ancient Egyptians talked about a similar time they called Zeep.
Zeep, right.
Yeah. The main idea is this sort of primordial time when the boundaries between the divine world and the mortal world were, a lot more fluid. And this wasn't just about, quick visits. It often involved the gods, or in this Hebraic context, the sons of God, watchers from Enoch, actually coming down to earth and getting involved with humans.
Involved how?
Intimately involved, even having children together.
Which brings us right back to Genesis 6 and this idea of angels, these sons of God marrying human women. Okay, now this is where my brain always kind of hits a wall, because traditionally, at least in later Christian theology, angels are seen as incorporeal beings, right? Spirit beings. The video even mentions Aquinas saying they don't need vocal cords or anything.
Right, no physical bodies in that understanding.
So how do beings without a physical body, have kids?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it really highlights a potential difference between maybe later theological ideas about angels and the earlier views you find in texts like Enoch, and maybe hinted at in Genesis 6 itself.
Okay.
The video brings up this really important concept of lust as a kind of first cause. So even if angels are traditionally seen as incorporeal, no physical body, the desire, this intense longing, is presented as the initial driver.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, how that desire actually resulted in physical offspring, that's the real sticking point, and it's been interpreted in different ways throughout history. Even some early church thinkers did believe angels could take on physical forms.
Interesting. Okay, so it seems like this Book of Enoch is absolutely vital for getting a handle on this whole picture. The video said it was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
It was, yes. Significant portions of it.
And it's even quoted directly in the New Testament. That seems like a pretty big deal for a book that isn't in most Bibles today.
It's undeniably significant. Finding parts of Enoch with the Dead Sea Scrolls tells you a lot about how important it was in ancient Jewish thought around that time, this Second Temple period.
Right.
And yes, absolutely quoted verbatim in the New Testament. Specifically, the book of Jude quotes a prophecy of Enoch, pulling it straight from First Enoch.
Wow.
And while it's not in the canon for most Western Christians or mainstream Judaism today, it is canonical scripture for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and Beta Israel Jewish traditions.
Okay, so it's still considered scripture by some groups. And it wasn't just Jude quoting it, was it? The video hinted there might be echoes of Enoch elsewhere in the New Testament. Maybe even something Jesus said.
That's right. The video mentioned the many mansions phrase Jesus uses in John's Gospel. Some scholars see parallels between that idea and Enoch's very detailed descriptions of, like, different levels or abodes in the heavens. There are other passages, too, that scholars debate, suggesting a wider familiarity with Enoch's ideas and language in that whole cultural and religious environment.
So it was sort of in the air.
It seems like it was part of the intellectual and religious landscape, yes.
Now, the video is careful to point out there isn't just one Book of Enoch. Could you quickly break down the different versions and which one is the main focus here?
Good point. Yes, there are actually 3 main texts associated with Enoch. When we're talking about this Genesis 6 connection and the New Testament quotes, we're almost always talking about First Enoch, which is also called Ethiopic Enoch.
First Enoch.
The other 2 are Second Enoch, or Slavonic Enoch, and Third Enoch, Hebrew Enoch. They're generally thought to be later writings. And even within First Enoch, it's actually a collection of different books or sections written over time. But the ones most relevant for us today are the Book of the Watchers, which we mentioned, and also the Book of Parables.
And the dating on this First Enoch is important, right? The video stress it was written before Christ.
Critically important. Yeah, the earliest parts of First Enoch, particularly the Book of the Watchers, are dated by scholars back to around, say, 300 BC, maybe even earlier for some bits.
Wow, so older than some parts of the Old Testament we have now.
Potentially contemporary with or even predating some later Old Testament writings, yes.
And that pre-Christian dating is huge, especially, like the video said, when Enoch talks about a figure called the Son of Man. That's a title Jesus used for himself all the time.
Absolutely striking. Finding detailed prophecies about a messianic figure, even using that specific title, Son of Man, in a text that demonstrably existed before Jesus was born, well, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's something.
It definitely points to a well-developed messianic expectation within certain Jewish circles back then, and the Book of Enoch was clearly part of feeding into that expectation.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty then.
Yeah.
The Watchers and their, let's call it a major screw-up. Yeah. What does Enoch actually say happened? What was their sin?
Okay, so the Book of Enoch, specifically the Book of the Watchers, lays out this narrative. These Watchers were a particular group, a class of angels, whose job was basically to watch over humanity.
Okay, sounds important.
Very. But the story goes, they saw human women and were just overcome by lust for them. According to the text, 200 of them made a plan.
200
of them. They descended onto Mount Hermon, and there they swore an oath together, a pact to go through with this plan, knowing full well it was wrong, a transgression.
An oath on a mountain.
Which is why Mount Hermon is traditionally linked with this story, sometimes called the Mountain of the Earth. Then they came down, took human women as wives, and these unions produced offspring. The giants, yes. They're called the Nephilim in Hebrew.
Giants. So this links directly back to that line in Genesis 6 about giants being on the earth back then. So Enoch is basically giving us the origin story for them.
Precisely. It provides the backstory. Fallen angels, human women, giant offspring.
This is where the videos started drawing these really cool parallels with other ancient cultures. Apparently, this idea wasn't just a Hebrew thing.
Not at all. And that's what's so fascinating. This Hebraic cosmological picture resonates strongly with similar beliefs found all over the ancient Near East and even beyond.
Like where?
Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome. The idea of divine beings interacting with humans, sometimes having children with them, was actually quite widespread in their mythologies. The video used the story of Atlantis from Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, as a really powerful parallel.
Atlantis, yeah. Most people know the name, the lost city. But the video zeroed in on the origin story. Tell us about that connection.
Right. So in Plato's account, which he says came from Egyptian priests via Solon, Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, falls in love with a mortal woman named Cleito. He marries her, sets her up on this island, Atlantis, and they have children, 5 sets of twin sons.
10 sons.
10 sons, who become the first kings of Atlantis. And here's the ticker. Plato describes these first kings, including Atlas himself, as being of great stature, essentially giants.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've got a god, a human woman, giant offspring, ruling a kingdom. It's incredibly similar to the Enoch story.
It's a direct parallel in structure. Divine, male, human, female, hybrid offspring who are giants and often rulers. It suggests, these weren't isolated myths, but maybe variations on a very old shared theme in the ancient world.
And the Egyptians apparently told Solon, this happened way back during some ancient war between Atlantis and Athens, and it all ended in a huge cataclysm.
Yeah.
Right? The video mentioned that too, this ancient belief in recurring world disasters.
Yes, the idea of cyclical destructions wasn't uncommon. Plato has the Egyptian priest telling Solon that Greece had forgotten its own ancient history due to these periodic cataclysms like floods and fires, but Egypt had preserved the records. So the Genesis flood story or the destruction described in connection with Atlantis or the end of the giants in Enoch, maybe in the ancient mindset, these weren't seen as unique one-off events, but part of a larger recurring cosmic drama.
It puts a whole different spin on it.
Okay,
so we've got fallen angels, giants, maybe global disasters. Now, the conversation in the video took a turn that I think might really surprise people. The nature of demons.
Yes.
Specifically in ancient Hebrew cosmology, it's not quite the image most of us have, is it? The sort of horns and pitchforks thing.
Not really, no. That's a crucial distinction the video brings up. Our sort of standard Western idea of demons is heavily shaped by later traditions, often mixing them up with the fallen angels who rebelled with Lucifer, Satan.
Right.
But the ancient Hebrew view, especially the one you get from reading the Book of Enoch, offers a much more specific and frankly kind of tragic origin story for demons.
More specific how? If they weren't the original fallen angels, what were they? According to Enoch, the video said they're the spirits of the giants.
That's exactly it. According to First Enoch and the cosmology it represents, demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the giants who died in the flood.
The dead giant spirits. Why them specifically?
Because they were this unnatural mix, see? Offspring of angels and humans, neither fully divine nor fully human. So when their physical bodies died in the flood, their spirits were, cursed.
Cursed how?
Cursed to wander the earth without a body. But here's the truly awful part. They retain all their old physical desires, hunger, thirst, lust, everything, but have no physical means to satisfy them. Ever.
Wow, that's bleak. The video used that analogy from Pirates of the Caribbean, remember? Barbossa's crew, cursed to be immortal, but unable to feel or enjoy anything.
It's a surprisingly good analogy, actually. It captures that feeling of perpetual, agonizing, unfulfilled longing. That's the nature of the curse described for these spirits in Enoch.
And just to be clear, this is different from Lucifer and his followers.
Totally distinct in this framework. You have the fallen angels, the watchers, who sinned by lusting and descending. And then you have their offspring, the giants. It's the spirits of those dead giants that become the demons, doomed to wander. Two separate categories.
Okay, that is a radically different picture of demons than I think many people hold. So how does this ancient understanding connect then to the New Testament? Because Jesus deals with demons or unclean spirits a lot.
Right, and this is where the video argues the Enochian perspective provides crucial context. The suggestion is that those unclean spirits Jesus encounters are precisely these disembodied spirits of the giant.
The ones cursed to wander.
Exactly. Lacking bodies, their primary drive is to inhabit a physical form, usually a human, sometimes animals, to try and experience the physical world again, to fulfill those desires, even vicariously.
And this could explain things like, what they saw as demonic possession causing illnesses.
That's the connection the video draws. Conditions like epilepsy or other severe mental and physical afflictions could have been interpreted in that context as the result of these spirits inhabiting and disrupting a human body.
The story of the Gerasene demoniac seems like a prime example in the video's argument. The demons recognize Jesus, and they beg him not to judge them before the appointed time. That sounds very specific.
It does sound specific, doesn't it? That encounter is presented as a really strong piece of evidence supporting this view.
How so?
Well, first, the demons immediately recognize Jesus as the Son of God.
Yeah.
Second, their plea about not being tormented before the appointed time lines up perfectly with the Book of Enoch, which describes a future specific judgment reserved for these wandering spirits.
Oh.
And third, their desperate request to be sent into the pigs rather than just being cast out into the abyss highlights that overwhelming desire for any kind of physical body, reinforcing the Enochian idea of their curse.
That makes sense within that framework. And the video also mentioned the Greeks had a similar idea with their daemons.
Yeah, that was another interesting parallel. The video points out that in some Greek thought, particularly Hesiod, daemons were considered the spirits of the people who lived during the mythical golden age before a cataclysm. So again, disembodied spirits from a previous world age.
So this concept of spirits of the dead from a prior age causing trouble wasn't exclusively Hebrew then. It suggests a wider ancient pattern of belief.
Precisely. It points towards perhaps a shared cultural memory or at least parallel cosmological developments across the ancient world. A common way of understanding these unseen forces and anomalous events may be rooted in some very old pre-flood narratives.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around this main thread. The Book of Enoch, which seems to have been well known back then, it gives this incredibly detailed story about the Watchers, these fallen angels who sinned with human women, producing the Nephilim, the giants.
Correct. It fleshes out what Genesis 6 just hints at.
And crucially, in this ancient Hebrew view, it's the spirits of those dead giants that are the demons or unclean spirits, these disembodied beings cursed to wander and seek bodies.
That's the core takeaway from the sources we looked at, yes. A very specific origin for demons, distinct from the original angelic rebellion, and directly tied to that Genesis 6 event via the Enoch narrative.
It's really quite a departure from how demons are often portrayed today.
It is indeed.
And the interconnectedness is just striking, how these ancient stories link up and the influence Enoch apparently had, even showing up in the New Testament. It really makes you look at some familiar Bible verses differently.
It absolutely does. Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on.
Yeah.
How might understanding these ancient perspectives, this Enochian cosmology, maybe reshape how you read not just Genesis 6, but other passages, both familiar ones and maybe some obscure ones, in ancient texts?
What does it suggest about how the ancient world remembered its distant past?
Exactly. What does it imply about shared stories, shared fears, maybe even shared experiences across cultures? It's worth considering the implications of these connections, maybe even digging into the Book of Enoch itself.
Yeah. It might offer a surprisingly different, maybe even illuminating way to look at how our ancestors understood their world, their cosmos.
A different lens, for sure.